The training camp buzzed with excited voices from dozens of different species. Young cadets from across the galaxy had gathered on the remote planet Xerion 7 for their final survival test before graduation. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of alien flowers from the nearby forest. Tom Wilson sat on a metal bench, adjusting his standard-issue boots while watching his classmates prepare for the day ahead. His roommate Blue, a tall insect-like being with shimmering green skin, was checking his equipment for the third time. The nervous clicking sounds he made with his mouth showed how worried he was about the upcoming challenge. "Attention all cadets!" Professor Thane's voice boomed across the camp. The crystal-like alien stood nearly 3 meters tall, his translucent body catching the sunlight and throwing rainbow patterns across the ground. "Please gather in the main tent for your final briefing." Tom followed the crowd of students into the large white tent. Inside, dozens of different aliens found seats on cushions designed for their various body types. There were the furry Cathari from the ice worlds, the aquatic Neph who needed special water suits to survive on land, and the rock-hard granite people who could survive almost anywhere. Tom was one of only 3 humans in the entire class. Professor Thane activated a large holographic display that showed a detailed map of the planet they were standing on. The image rotated slowly, revealing forests, mountains, rivers, and vast empty spaces. Different colored zones marked safe and dangerous areas. "This planet has been used for survival training for over 200 years, the professor began, his voice creating musical tones that their translators turned into words. "Most of the surface is safe for your week-long exercise. You will be dropped in teams of 4 at different locations. Your job is to survive for 7 days using only basic equipment and return to this base camp." Tom leaned forward with interest. He had always loved challenges, especially ones that involved exploring new places. Back on Earth, he had spent his childhood camping and hiking with his grandfather in the desert regions of Nevada. Those experiences had taught him that even the harshest places could be survived if you knew what to look for. The holographic map zoomed in on various regions. Green zones marked forests with plenty of water and food. Yellow zones showed mountains where the cold could be dangerous, but shelter was available. Orange zones indicated swamplands with poisonous plants and creatures that needed to be avoided. However, Professor Thane continued, his body darkening to a deep purple color, there are several areas that are absolutely forbidden. These red zones are deadly to all known forms of life. You must never enter them under any circumstances. The first red zone appeared on the northern part of the continent. The ice fields will freeze your body in minutes, even with thermal suits. The acid swamps in the south will dissolve your equipment and your skin. The volcanic region in the east has temperatures that will cook you alive. Tom nodded along with the other students. These dangers made sense and were similar to hazards on many worlds. But then the professor highlighted a massive red zone that covered nearly a quarter of the continent. "Most dangerous of all is the Great Desert," Professor Thane said, his voice becoming even more serious. "This wasteland has claimed the lives of 17 students over the past 2 centuries. It is completely without water for over 500 kilometers in any direction. Surface temperatures reach 70 degrees during the day and drop to minus 30 at night. Sandstorms can strip flesh from bone, and the thermal shock will kill you before thirst even becomes a factor." The hologram zoomed closer to show endless waves of pale sand stretching to the horizon. No plants, no rocks, no signs of life anywhere. Just empty dunes that seemed to go on forever. Several students made nervous sounds in their native languages. "The desert is a sterile environment," the professor continued. "Nothing lives there, nothing survives there. In 200 years of training exercises, we have never recovered a single body from that wasteland. Students who enter the desert simply disappear forever." Tom raised his hand, and Professor Thane's crystal head turned toward him. "Yes, Cadet Wilson?" "Professor, What about underground water sources? Or adapted plant life that might not show up on surface scans? Tom asked. A few students turned to look at him with expressions that seemed to say he was asking foolish questions. Professor Thane's body flickered with what might have been amusement. Nothing lives in the Great Desert, Cadet. Our orbital surveys and deep ground scans have confirmed this repeatedly over 2 centuries. It is a dead zone. This is exactly why it remains forbidden. Tom nodded and put his hand down, but Blue noticed that his human roommate had a strange look on his face. Where? Other students showed proper fear and respect for the warnings. Tom looked curious and thoughtful. He was taking detailed notes in his electronic pad, including coordinates, weather patterns, and seasonal information about the desert. The briefing continued for another hour as Professor Thane explained the rules, emergency procedures, and communication protocols. Each team would have a rescue beacon to use only in life-threatening situations. Using the beacon meant automatic failure of the exercise, but it would bring immediate help. After the meeting ended, students scattered to finalize their preparations. Tom and Blue walked back to their shared shelter to pack their supplies. Blue watched with growing concern as Tom spent extra time studying the planetary maps, particularly the areas around the desert border. Tom, you are not thinking what I think you are thinking, are you? Blue asked, his translator making clicking sounds as he spoke. Tom looked up from his map with an innocent expression. Just being thorough, Blue. You know me, I like to understand the whole picture before we start. But Blue had been Tom's roommate for 6 months. He knew the human well enough to recognize when he was planning something. Tom had that same look. He got before he had volunteered for the extra dangerous asteroid mining simulation, or when he had suggested they try the abandoned cave system during their last training exercise. Tom, promise me you will stick to the safe zones, Blue said. Seriously? Of course, Tom replied, but he did not look Blue in the eyes when he said it. Instead, he continued studying his maps and making notes about wind patterns and seasonal changes. That night, as Blue tried to sleep, he could hear Tom quietly moving around their shelter, reorganizing his equipment and whispering to himself as he made calculations. The human was definitely planning something, and Blue had a very bad feeling about what it might be. Dawn broke with the sound of emergency alarms echoing across the training camp. Blue's eyes snapped open as the urgent beeping filled their shelter. He rolled over to wake Tom but found only empty bedding and a small note written in the human's. Messy handwriting. Gone to check something important. Back soon. Do not worry. Tom Blue's mandibles clicked rapidly as panic set in. He grabbed the note and rushed outside, where other students were emerging from their shelters looking confused and alarmed. The alarms meant someone was missing, and Blue already knew who. Professor Thane materialized near the command center, his crystal body glowing bright red with urgency. All students report to the assembly area immediately, his voice boomed across the camp. Within minutes, nearly 60 cadets had gathered in a nervous crowd. Professor Thane began calling names from his electronic roster, and each student responded with their species version of present. When he called Tom Wilson, silence answered. When did anyone last see Cadet Wilson? The professor asked. Blue stepped forward, holding the note. He was gone when I woke up. He left this. He handed the paper to Professor Thane, whose crystal fingers carefully examined the simple message. What did he mean by check something important? Professor Thane asked Blue. I think... Blue hesitated, then spoke more firmly. I think he went to the desert, Professor. Yesterday, during the briefing, he asked strange questions about underground water and plant life. He spent all evening studying maps of the forbidden zones, especially the desert region. A ripple of shocked voices passed through the gathered students. Several of them had grown fond of Tom during their months of training together. The human was always curious about everything, asking questions that others never thought of, and finding solutions to problems that seemed impossible. Professor Thane's body shifted to a deep purple color that indicated extreme concern. Begin immediate search protocols. All students will be organized into search teams to cover the approved training areas. We will use every available scanner and detection device. The search began within the hour. Teams of students spread out across the safe zones, their electronic scanners sweeping for any trace of human DNA or the specific energy signature of Tom's equipment. Flying drones launched from the base camp, covering vast areas of forest and mountain terrain. But as the hours passed, the search teams found nothing. No footprints, no equipment dropped along trails, no energy readings from Tom's communication device. It was as if the human had simply vanished without leaving any trace behind. By afternoon, Professor Thane had to face the growing possibility that Blue's guess was correct. He authorized long-range scanners to examine the borders of the forbidden zones, even though protocol said no student should ever be near those areas. The results came back just before sunset. A faint trace of human DNA had been detected at the very edge of the Great Desert, along with disturbed sand patterns that suggested someone had walked into the forbidden wasteland. The trail disappeared after just a few hundred meters, swallowed by the shifting dunes. Professor Thane gathered the exhausted search teams back at the base camp as darkness fell. His crystal body had turned almost black with grief, and when he spoke, his usual musical tones sounded flat and hollow. "Fellow students," he began slowly, "we have found evidence that Cadet Tom Wilson entered the Great Desert sometime during the night. Long-range scanners show he traveled approximately 2 kilometers into the wasteland before the trail was lost. Several students made sounds of distress in their various languages. Blue's clicking became so rapid it overwhelmed his translator, creating only static noise. 2 of the Cathari students began the low humming sound their species made when mourning the dead. "I am officially ending this training exercise," Professor Thane announced. "All students will return to the academy tomorrow morning. We will hold a memorial service for Cadet Wilson when we arrive." "But, Professor," Blue managed to say through his emotional clicking, "should we not attempt a rescue mission? What if he is still alive?" The crystal alien's body flickered with deep sadness. "Blue, I understand your friendship with Tom makes this difficult to accept, but no living thing survives in the Great Desert. The environmental conditions are beyond the tolerance of any known biology. Even if Tom somehow found shelter from the heat during the day, the nighttime temperatures would have killed him within hours." Professor Thane activated a holographic display showing the current conditions in the desert. Surface temperatures had reached 73 degrees during the day, and satellite readings showed they were already dropping rapidly as the sun set. By midnight, the temperature would be nearly 50 degrees below freezing. The thermal shock alone would be fatal, the professor explained. "And that assumes he somehow found water, which is impossible since none exists anywhere in that region. I am sorry, but Tom is gone." The students began returning to their shelters to pack their belongings for the early departure. Many of them sat together in small groups, sharing memories of their lost classmate and trying to comfort each other. Blue could not bring himself to pack Tom's belongings. Instead, he sat on his bed holding one of Tom's notebooks, reading through pages of curious observations about alien plants, geological formations, and survival techniques. The human had filled dozens of pages with sketches and notes about everything they had encountered during their training. On the last page, Blue found something that made his translator emit a sound of surprise. Tom had drawn a detailed diagram of what appeared to be an underground water collection system, with notes about desert survival techniques from Earth history and emergency water location methods. Below the diagram, Tom had written, "If the scans only look for big water sources, they miss the small ones. Desert people have lived for thousands of years by finding tiny springs and hidden oases. Maybe the scanners are looking for the wrong things." Blue realized that Tom had not wandered into the desert unprepared or by accident. The human had been planning this expedition from the moment he heard Professor Thane's warnings. Tom believed. There was something in that wasteland that everyone else had missed, and he had gone to prove it. As Blue finally began packing his own belongings, he kept looking toward the desert through their shelter's small window. Somewhere out there in that vast emptiness, his friend was either dead or facing the most dangerous night of his life. Blue found himself hoping that Tom's crazy human optimism might somehow keep him alive until morning, even though logic said it was impossible. The last thing Blue packed was Tom's notebook. He decided he would give it to Tom's family when they returned to Earth, so they would know their son had died trying to prove that the impossible was possible. It seemed like the kind of thing Tom would have wanted them to understand. The transport ship sat on the landing pad with its engines warming up for departure. Students moved their packed belongings toward the cargo bay while Professor Thane conducted final equipment checks. The mood in the camp was somber as everyone, prepared to leave behind the place where they had lost their friend. Blue stood at the edge of the camp doing a final perimeter sweep, a routine security check that had to be completed before departure. His 6 compound eyes were focused on his scanner, but his thoughts were on Tom and the empty bunk that would remind him of his lost roommate during the long journey home. Something moving in the distance caught his attention. Blue raised his head and looked toward the desert, expecting to see a small animal or perhaps a piece of debris blown by the morning wind. What he saw instead made all 6 of his eyes focus sharply on the same point. A figure was walking across the sand dunes toward their camp. Blue's scanner slipped from his grasping claw and hit the ground with a metallic clang. The figure was definitely humanoid, moving with a steady, unhurried pace across the pale sand. Even at this distance, Blue could tell it was carrying something bulky under both arms. "Professor Thane!" Blue's translator crackled with excitement and disbelief. "Professor, you must see this right now." The crystal alien appeared beside Blue with the instantaneous movement his species used in emergencies. "What is the problem, Blue? We must depart in 10 minutes to meet our orbital window." Blue pointed toward the desert with one of his 4 arms. "Look there, Professor. Someone is walking toward us from the wasteland." Professor Thane's crystal body shifted through several colors rapidly as his advanced eyesight focused on the distant figure. What he observed should have been impossible according to every scientific principle he knew. Tom Wilson was walking casually across the sand dunes as if he were taking a pleasant stroll through a park. He showed no signs of stumbling, dehydration, or exhaustion. His movements were steady and confident, and he appeared to be carrying several large, round objects secured to his body with improvised straps and ropes. "This cannot be happening," Professor Thane whispered, his musical voice becoming discordant with shock. "No life form survives 4 days in that environment. The thermal variations alone should have killed him within the first night." Other students began noticing the commotion and gathered around Blue and Professor Thane. Soon the entire camp was staring at the impossible sight of their supposedly dead classmate approaching from the forbidden wasteland. As Tom got closer, details of his condition became clearer. His skin had a healthy tan, rather than the burns and blisters expected from severe exposure. His standard-issue clothing was sandy and somewhat worn, but intact and functional. Most remarkably, he appeared well-hydrated and energetic, not at all like someone who had been wandering a waterless desert for 4 days. The objects he was carrying became recognizable as he reached the camp perimeter. They were large, green, and striped like some kind of fruit. Tom set them down carefully at the edge of the camp and grinned at the crowd of stunned faces staring at him. "Hey, everyone," Tom said cheerfully, brushing sand from his hair. "Sorry I am late. The trip took longer than I expected, but I think you will like what I found." He gestured proudly at the large green fruits. Anyone want some fresh watermelon? These are perfectly ripe and really sweet. The silence that followed was complete. 60 students and instructors from dozens of different worlds stared at Tom, then at the impossible fruit he had brought from an impossible place, then back at Tom. Several students' translators made small beeping sounds as their minds tried to process what they were seeing. Professor Thane was the first to find his voice. Tom, how are you alive? Alive? Tom looked puzzled by the question. Why would I not be alive? I had plenty of water once I found the right places to look, and the temperature was not too bad if you knew how to manage it properly. He pulled out a rough knife made from a piece of metal and began cutting into one of the watermelons. Besides, the locals were really helpful once I met them. Blue's mandibles began clicking so rapidly that his translator could not keep up. Locals? Tom, there are no locals in the desert. Professor Thane said nothing lives there. Tom paused in his fruit, cutting and looked up with genuine confusion. Really? That is strange because I met quite a few of them. Nice people, though they do not talk much. Very practical and hard-working. They were really impressed when I helped them fix their irrigation system. The watermelon Tom was cutting revealed deep red flesh that dripped with moisture. The scent of fresh, sweet fruit filled the air around the camp. He cut off a slice and offered it to Blue, who took it automatically with one of his manipulator claws. The fruit was cool, refreshing, and perfectly ripe. Blue had eaten watermelon before during their Earth cuisine classes at the academy, but this one tasted better than any he remembered. It was impossible that such perfect fruit could exist in a sterile wasteland, yet he was holding the evidence in his own claw. Tom, Professor Thane said carefully, I need you to explain exactly what happened in the desert. Every detail. Sure thing, Professor. Tom continued slicing fruit and handing pieces to anyone who wanted them. The first night was pretty challenging, I will admit. I got turned around during a sandstorm and my water supply ran lower than I planned. But then I remembered some things my grandfather taught me about desert survival. Professor Thane's crystal body flickered through colors of confusion and fascination. What things? Well, deserts are not actually empty, Tom explained as if this was obvious. They just look empty to people who do not know what signs to look for. My grandfather was a prospector in the Nevada desert back on Earth, and he taught me how to read the landscape. Tom pointed back toward the dunes he had emerged from. See, life finds a way to survive even in the harshest conditions. The trick is understanding that survival in extreme environments requires different strategies than survival in comfortable ones. Several students had gathered closer to listen while eating pieces of the impossible watermelon. The fruit was so refreshing that even those species who did not normally eat plant matter found it pleasant. By the second day, I had located my first water source, Tom continued. Small springs hidden in rock formations, morning dew collection systems, plants that store moisture in their roots. Your orbital scanners were looking for big lakes and rivers, but they missed all the little sources that actually matter for survival. Professor Thane's form was now shifting rapidly through colors as his advanced mind tried to process this information. But our deep ground scans showed no water sources for 500 kilometers in any direction. Tom grinned and took a bite of watermelon. Your scanners were looking for the wrong type of water sources. Desert survival is about finding lots of small water sources instead of depending on one big one. There is actually quite a bit of water in that desert if you know how to find it and collect it properly. The departure was postponed while Professor Thane set up a formal debriefing session in the main tent. Tom sat at a simple metal table, still covered in desert sand, but looking remarkably healthy for someone who had supposedly survived the impossible. Around him, students and instructors gathered in a semicircle, their recording devices capturing every word of his explanation. Tom, Professor Thane began, his crystal form now a steady blue color that indicated intense scientific curiosity. I want you to describe your experience day by day, starting from when you left the camp. Tom nodded and accepted another slice of watermelon from the pile he had brought back. I left about 2 hours after midnight on the first night. I wanted to cross the initial dune field during the coolest part of the day, which is just before dawn. Blue leaned forward from his position in the front row. Why did you not tell me you were leaving? Because you would have tried to stop me, and then you would have gotten in trouble when I left anyway. Tom replied honestly. I knew this was something I needed to do alone, at least at first. Professor Thane activated a holographic recorder to document the session officially. Continue with your timeline, Tom. The first 6 hours went according to plan. I reached the edge of the deep desert just as the sun was coming up, and I found shelter in a rock formation to wait out the day's heat. That is when I started noticing things your surveys missed. Tom pulled out his personal data pad, which was scratched and sandy but still functional. The screen showed photographs he had taken during his journey. The first image displayed what looked like ordinary sand and rocks, but Tom pointed to subtle details that revealed themselves under closer examination. See these color variations in the sand? Tom indicated areas where the pale grains had slightly different shades. Those darker patches indicate moisture closer to the surface. And these rock formations create tiny microclimates where the temperature is 10 degrees cooler than the surrounding area. Professor Thane studied the images with growing fascination. These variations are too small for our orbital scanners to detect. Exactly. Your equipment was designed to find big, obvious resources. But desert survival depends on finding small, hidden resources and using them efficiently. Tom scrolled to the next image. By the end of the first day, I had collected about 2 liters of water using dew condensation methods and moisture extraction from certain plants. The photograph showed Tom's improvised water collection system made from his emergency shelter, material arranged to capture moisture from the air during the cool night hours. It was a simple but effective setup that could produce small amounts of clean water from seemingly dry conditions. The second day was when things got really interesting. Tom continued, his eyes lighting up with excitement. I was following what looked like an old animal trail when I stumbled across something amazing. He scrolled to a new image that made every being in the tent lean forward in astonishment. The photograph showed a circular opening in the ground, carefully concealed by a covering made of woven plant material and sand. It was clearly artificial construction, but so well camouflaged that it would be invisible from more than a few meters away. That is when I met the Sandwalkers, Tom said simply. Professor Thane's crystal body went completely still. Sandwalkers? Tom nodded and switched to a video file on his datapad. The recording showed a group of humanoid beings emerging from the hidden entrance. They were tall and lean, with skin that seemed to shift color between different shades of brown and tan, depending on the lighting. Their movements were graceful and efficient, perfectly adapted to their harsh environment. They call themselves the Sandwalkers, Tom explained as the video continued. They have been living in the deep desert for centuries, maybe longer. Their entire civilization is underground, built into natural cave systems and connected by tunnels, the T. Video showed one of the Sandwalkers approaching Tom with cautious curiosity. The being was nearly 2 meters tall, with large eyes adapted for low light conditions and long, slender fingers that seemed perfect for delicate work. This is Kanto, their chief engineer, Tom said, pausing the video on a clear view of the alien's face. He does not speak any galactic languages, but we managed to communicate using drawings and gestures. Very intelligent people and incredibly skilled at desert survival. Blue's translator made excited clicking sounds. But how did they remain hidden from all our surveys? They are experts at concealment, Tom replied. During the day, they retreat deep underground where the temperature stays cool and constant. They only come to the surface during dawn and dusk hours, and their entrance points are perfectly camouflaged. From the air, their settlements look like natural rock formations. Tom scrolled to more images showing the interior of the Sandwalker settlement. The photographs revealed sophisticated architecture carved directly from living rock, with intricate water management systems and climate control that maintained comfortable conditions even in the desert heat. "This is incredible," Professor Thane whispered, his form flickering through colors of amazement. "A completely unknown intelligent species with advanced technology adapted specifically for extreme desert survival. That is where the watermelons come from," Tom continued, showing images of underground agricultural chambers. "The Sandwalkers have developed farming techniques that can grow crops in desert conditions using minimal water and underground growing spaces." The photographs showed vast underground chambers filled with carefully tended plants. Irrigation systems made from carved stone channels brought water from hidden springs to feed crops that grew in nutrient-rich soil maintained in artificial caverns. "Their agricultural system is amazing," Tom said, his voice full of admiration. "Deep root systems that tap into underground water sources, heat-resistant crops, and water recycling techniques that waste almost nothing. They can grow fresh food in conditions that would kill most plants within hours." Professor Thane was now recording everything on multiple devices. "How did you communicate with them without a common language?" "Universal problem solving," Tom grinned. "On my third day, I discovered that one of their main irrigation tunnels had collapsed, cutting off water to their largest melon field. The Sandwalkers were trying to clear the blockage, but they needed help moving some heavy stones." Tom showed a video of himself working alongside several Sandwalkers, using improvised tools to move rocks and rebuild a collapsed water channel. Despite the language barrier, they worked together efficiently, with Tom's human strength and problem-solving skills complementing the Sandwalkers' technical knowledge. "It took us 2 days to fix the problem completely," Tom continued. "But once we got the water flowing again, Kanto insisted I take some of their finest melons as a gift. He said it was the first time in their history that an outsider had helped them with their survival instead of threatening it." Professor Thane's crystal form was now glowing with excitement as the implications became clear. "Tom, do you realize what this means? You have made first contact with a previously unknown intelligent species. This is the most significant discovery in decades." Tom looked around at the gathered students and instructors, many of whom were staring at him with expressions of awe and disbelief. "I guess I did not think about it that way. They needed help. I was able to provide it, and they shared their food with me in return. Seemed like the normal thing to do." Blue's mandibles clicked with something that sounded like laughter. "Only you, Tom, would accidentally discover a lost civilization and think it was normal." 6 months later, the Galactic Academy Council chambers buzzed with excited conversation as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for an emergency session. The massive circular hall had been redesigned to accommodate several new types of seating, including special climate-controlled areas for the Sandwalker delegation that had traveled from their desert homeworld. Tom sat in the human section, wearing his new uniform with the gold stripes of a senior instructor. Next to him, Blue clicked nervously as he adjusted his own new insignia, marking him as Tom's official partner in the Academy's Extreme Environment program. Both of them were still getting used to their rapid promotions and new responsibilities. In the center of the hall, a massive holographic display showed the transformed landscape of what had once been called the Great Desert. The image revealed a thriving network of settlements, research stations, and agricultural facilities that stretched across the formerly forbidden wasteland. Director Stone, a massive rock-like being whose species was known for their conservative approach to policy changes, called the session to order with a sound like grinding boulders. "This emergency council session will address the complete revision of our survival training protocols based on recent discoveries made by instructor Tom Wilson." The holographic display shifted to show statistical data from the past 6 months. Trade agreements, scientific exchanges, technological innovations, and diplomatic relationships that had all emerged from Tom's accidental first contact with the Sandwalker civilization. The results speak for themselves, Director Stone continued. The Sandwalker agricultural techniques are now being implemented on 47 different worlds, solving food shortage problems that we had considered unsolvable. Their water conservation methods have revolutionized terraforming projects across 3 sectors. Tom stood when his name was called to address the council. Even after months of giving presentations to increasingly important groups of officials, he still felt nervous speaking to so many different species at once. "Thank you, Director Stone," Tom began, his voice amplified throughout the hall by advanced translation systems. "When I walked into that desert 6 months ago, I was not trying to make any great discoveries. I was just curious about whether the scans had missed something important." A ripple of what sounded like laughter passed through the assembled representatives. Tom's modesty about his achievements had become famous throughout the galaxy, and many beings found his casual attitude toward extraordinary accomplishments both refreshing and amusing. "What I learned," Tom continued, "is that survival is not about avoiding dangerous places. It is about understanding that every environment has life in it somewhere, even if that life has adapted in ways we do not immediately recognize." The holographic display showed before and after images of the desert region. The before pictures revealed what appeared to be empty wasteland, while the after images showed the same areas teeming with hidden settlements, underground rivers, and thriving ecosystems that had been invisible to traditional scanning methods. "The Sandwalkers taught me that what looks impossible is often just unexpected," Tom said. "They survived in conditions we thought were deadly by developing techniques we had never imagined. Instead of trying to change their environment to suit themselves, they changed themselves to work with their environment." Kanto, the Sandwalker chief engineer, stood from his specially designed seating area and activated his own translation device. His voice, when converted to Galactic Standard, had a musical quality that reminded the audience of wind moving through stone formations. "The humans brought us new perspectives on problems we had struggled with for generations," Kanto said, his large eyes reflecting the chamber's lights. "Tom Wilson showed us that cooperation between different species creates solutions that neither could discover alone." The holographic display switched to show joint projects that had emerged from the Human-Sandwalker partnership. Advanced water recycling systems that combined earth engineering with Sandwalker conservation techniques. New crop varieties that could grow in previously impossible conditions. Underground city designs that could house multiple species comfortably in extreme environments. "The success of these collaborations has led us to a fundamental question," Director Stone announced. "If our basic assumptions about the Great Desert were completely wrong, what other assumptions might we be making about other supposedly impossible environments?" Professor Thane, who had been promoted to head the Academy's new Xenobiology Research Division, activated a new holographic map showing dozens of worlds with regions previously classified as uninhabitable. "We have begun preliminary surveys of similar environments on 17 different planets," Professor Thane reported, his crystal body glowing with scientific excitement. Early results suggest that Tom's experience was not unique. "We are finding evidence of adapted life forms in places we had written off as sterile wastelands." Tom raised his hand to address the council again. "If I may make a suggestion, we should not just be looking for new life forms. We should be asking what those life forms might be able to teach us about survival, cooperation, and adaptation." Blue stood beside his human partner, his translator clicking with enthusiasm. "Tom has developed new training protocols that focus on curiosity instead of caution, cooperation instead of conquest. Our preliminary test groups show remarkable improvement in survival rates and problem-solving abilities." The holographic display showed statistics from the new training program. Students who learned Tom's approach to extreme environments were not only surviving longer in dangerous conditions, but were also making contact with previously unknown species and forming beneficial relationships that led to mutual aid and technological exchange. The old approach taught us to fear and avoid dangerous environments, Tom explained. The new approach teaches us to respect those environments and look for the life that has already learned to thrive there. When we find that life, we ask what we can learn from each other instead of how we can exploit or avoid it. Kanto activated his translator again. The Sandwalker people vote to formally join the Galactic Academy as full members. We offer our desert survival knowledge to all species who wish to learn, and we request access to the Academy's archives so that we may learn from other species' survival techniques. A murmur of approval passed through the assembled representatives. The Sandwalkers' membership would be the first time in Academy history that a species had been discovered and inducted entirely through student initiative rather than official first contact protocols. Director Stone called for the formal vote on the new training protocols. All those in favor of adopting the Wilson method as standard curriculum for extreme environment survival training? The vote was unanimous.